All right, well, come on, everyone. We're going to fill out the room here momentarily and then get rolling for the first edition of our NBA awards.
Get ready for some caveats or explainers or whatever. However we define this.
All right, should we do some faces real quickly?
Sure.
All right. How hard it was to do this year? I actually didn't think it was that hard. We'll have to get into that.
LeBron James on off splits.
All right, and
something worth smiling about. We'll just do it that way.
Okay, that's good. That's good. All right. All right, let's do a podcast. Welcome on to our first 2024-25 awards edition of Dunc'd On. Thanks so much for those of y'all who are joining us on YouTube, on the free feed, and of course on Dunc'd On Prime, ad-free. For those of you who didn't listen to our last show on Friday night, which is also a public show, I want to remind you that we have a public newsletter that is new that you can sign up for. Link to that is in the show notes, and you can get Dan Feldman's writing twice a week with that, and of course also get reminded of all of our shows, etc. So get a couple emails a week on that if you want to get some of Dan's writing for free and be part of the Dunc'd On universe. Even if you're not part of Dunc'd On Prime, I encourage you to do that. All right, Danny, you promised everyone some caveats before in our pre-show.
So I think the most important one to note with this is that these are not predictive. This is not who we think will be the MVP, Defensive Player of the Year at the end of the year. It is that.
Nor is it predictive of who we think our colleagues would vote for.
No. It is who we think deserves this award using, broadly speaking, the criteria of the award at this point in time. So that is using the games we have. I will tell you, I didn't regionally factor in, like the percentage eligibility criteria or anything like that if you played. So that's really the big one, is that it is what we've seen so far. The other general thing that I'll note is that if a player played in fewer than half of his team's games, I absolutely did not consider them for anything. If they played more, slightly more than half, it takes a superlative performance for me to put you in the higher echelons. There are a few guys, but there aren't that many.
Yeah, it's some important aspects on how to look at things. And I will say this too, for me with MVP, with all NBA in particular, if there is a tie, I will generally default to who I think is just the better player overall. But at this point, I think, and particularly because this is a season that has seen a lot of surprises so far, as we'll get to. But for me, this is a chance to just take stock of what's happened already. And part of the fun of this is to say, oh man, this guy's been unbelievable so far. Like, is this going to last or not? But again, this is not, hey, Ty Jerome is shooting 52% from three. That's going to regress. So if that happens, he won't be in the 6 Man of the Year conversation. No, it's like, he did what he did. He shot 52% from three. That is part of the resume here. So let's begin with our MVP choices, Danny.
Most Valuable Player is always tricky because it is, for me, the only award that more heavily weights availability, because part of value is being available. And so to me, per minute, unequivocally, the best player in the NBA has been Nikola Jokic. He's being completely ridiculous to do some of the basic counting stats: 28.6 points, 12.7 rebounds, and 10.3 assists per 36 minutes. We like to use per 36 because that equalizes some stuff in terms of playing time, though availability does matter here. Jokic also, if you prefer this version of stats, 66.5% true shooting on about a little under 30 usage. He also has the second highest total usage of like anybody that's really in the MVP All NBA consideration. The other one who's there
let's
is
define that quickly, by the way, because especially since this is the first time we're doing this for anyone who's new. Total usage is a stat that was developed by Seth Partnow that we use now. And basically what it looks at is how many of your team's chances when you're on the floor did you create via either a shot, a trip to the free throw line, a turnover, or the special part of this is via a potential assist. So you're setting up a player on your team. You might make it, you might miss this, but in terms of just the amount that you are creating for your team, and that total or that playmaking usage is 21.8%. So on 21.8% of possessions, when Nikola Jokic is on the floor, he is setting up a teammate for a shot, and he's taking a shot on a further 25%. So yeah, he is right up there at the top of the league in terms of total usage, certainly among players that are in this discussion for MVP. He has a pretty big advantage in that statistic. He also has the second highest playmaking usage in the NBA behind Trae Young.
And then the other part of Jokic's resume that is so preposterous, it's not that the on-off offensive rating, like, yes, the Denver Nuggets score 34.5 fewer points per 100 possessions when Jokic is off the floor versus on. And that is it's just ludicrous. But I think that part of that, and this is something that I'm going to talk about in some of the All-NBA discussions, is that, yes, they've been terrible when he's off the floor. But when Jokic is on the floor, the Nuggets are scoring 127.3 points per 100 possessions.
That is an absolutely deranged number.
That's the more important number.
It's insane. It's completely insane. Yeah.
And when you consider that some of his teammates have been unavailable and that some of his teammates are having seasons below expectations, Jamal Murray, then that's even more impressive. And so Jokic, he has been the driving force behind the single best individual offensive rating in the league. And so to me, he has been the best player. Instead, in some ways, I think we can kind of acknowledge that. The question becomes, even though Jokic has played over 100 fewer minutes than the other top-level contenders, has he been better by enough? And I don't want to dwell on this because it's a like first quarter of the year awards, rather than if it was the end of the year, we would probably spend an hour on this. But it is a fascinating conversation because we don't usually have it.
Yeah, I think he has been. I mean, in particular too, because I penalize guys a little bit less if they miss time for, say, like a personal reason than an injury.
Sure.
And obviously he missed 3 games for the birth of his kid. So, and then also, I generally pay more attention to, in these analyses, to just what is the team doing when you're on the floor. I don't care as much who your replacements are and who's off, but it is worth noting that it's not as much about the replacement when you actually miss games as opposed to just what happens when you are sitting on the bench within a game and you probably have a bunch of bench guys behind you. And so, I mean, the fact that they are negative 16.4 when he's off the floor, like, I truly believe, like, they're going to, they're playing just about at the level of the best team in basketball when he's on the floor. There are a few guys who have better overall net ratings than him on teams that are a lot deeper. They're plus 12 when he's on the floor. And the fact that they are just like, I mean, if they didn't have him, I mean, it's pretty obvious. Like, he is dragging these guys around. Like, there are some pieces, but he is the one that makes it all work. I mean, to be 127 when he's on the floor with the team that basically takes the fewest threes in the league, and to the extent that they are actually shooting a really high percentage from 3, it's because he's shooting over 50% from downtown on the season. And he can take units that are starting Christian Braun. Yeah, he'll make some open shots, but he's not a high volume guy from 3. And Murray has struggled, and they're playing either Peyton Watson or Aaron Gordon. And the fact that they are still just destroying people on the offensive end. He definitely has by far the best on-court team offensive rating in this sample among guys who are even remotely in consideration for all NBA. Second is Darius Garland, 4 points per 100 behind him at 123.3 out of that sample. And so the fact that he can boost this pedestrian level of team offensively to this level of offensive performance when he's on the floor is absolutely mind-blowing. Like, I don't know if there's anybody in NBA history, I don't think there is, who could get this collection of talent to a 127 offensive rating over any length of time.
And it's not through insane shooting luck or anything like that. We've talked about the low volume of threes they take. And a lot of the best shots that Denver generates are either Jokic shots or Jokic passes. And so this is earned primarily by Jokic. It is one of the most individually valuable offensive stretches I can ever recall. And that's really, really impressive. And so the way I reconciled this was that I have Jokic 1 as well. And you can say, whether you're wins above replacement or EPM, he is actually not the highest in the playing, that stat multiplied by playing time. But I believe that part of it is that it's underappreciated. And as you said, part of it is just like you reward the individual dominance. But what I did is I did not have Jokic in a tier of his own. We do this for MVP, just like we do in player rankings, or at least I do. So instead, I put him in the same group with the other two because I believe, especially because of the considerations when it comes to availability, that when you look at how much he has meant to his team, because he missed those couple games, then it's at least a conversation. Whereas I think
let me finish my Jokic
sure.
first here, because but before we get into the other guys, I think there are a couple other candidates who are pretty interesting here. But number one, Jokic is averaging 37 minutes a game. Of the other guys who are in consideration, Kevin Durant's 37.4, Jokic 37.3, and Anthony Edwards is 37.5. So Jokic is actually averaging, of the guys in consideration for this, and I think the whole league too, third in minutes per game. And this is a center. Centers do not play this many minutes. Like, that doesn't happen. Then his offensive EPM is 8.1, second highest in the league is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at 5.7. That is a massive difference. He does actually have a negative 0.7 defensive EPM. I don't think he's been quite as good on defense this year. They just, in part due to his crazy offensive load, they haven't had him playing the best scheme for him, which is getting out on the floor more, just to kind of preserve him a little bit. So he actually has a negative defensive estimated plus minus. Estimated Raptors below where he is as well. Neil Payne compiles that. He used to work with Nate Silver on that. So he's just barely in the positive on defensive Raptor. But I don't think that Nikola Jokic is a negative defensive player right now. There's some shooting luck involved there as well. The fact that they're better defensively when he's off the floor than on. So those are the things that I would point to. But I mean, he's just been, and by the way too, that he's actually semi-threatening. He's not going to do it, but semi-threatening to lead the league in points per game, rebounds per game, and assists per game, which is John Hollinger wrote about this. Dan wrote about it for our newsletter, of just like how absolutely ridiculous that is, and just completely unprecedented. I mean, he's like, I realize that, he's played 14 games and Shai's played 19. He's 100 to 170 minutes or so behind a couple of these other contenders. But Nikola Jokic might be having the best offensive season of all time through this through this period of time, right? Like, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna take that and say, no, you're actually in the same tier, or you're number 2 in MVP, when you have a credible argument for that.
That's completely reasonable. It was something I was debating, because Jokic has been so much better, and I think that now we can talk about. To me, there are two other gentlemen that are kind of in this next area, whether it's a separate tier or the same one, and they are Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jason Tatum. And I want to give Jason Tatum a lot of credit for. We've talked about his passing. That was something that's come up recently, and he's upped his playmaking usage up to a little bit under 15%. Tatum is actually in the vicinity of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He's in the vicinity of a few other guys in this kind of okay, you're running a lot of the passing through them, and that helps Tatum be a larger part of the offense. And so he's at 46% total usage, which is a pretty high rate. Like that's more in the range of like some of the more active guys in their offense rather than more of like a pure scorer. And so Tatum, he's done that. He's also been effective as an individual scorer. He's at 61.5% true shooting, which is actually virtually identical to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And he's done it, with a large role within the offense. He's taking 10.5 threes per 36. And Tatum has been, the Celtics offense has been better. Their defense has been better when he's been on the floor versus off. And they are not a team with horrendous supporting talent where it's like, oh, okay, you're going to lineups that don't make any sense. The Boston Celtics are one of the, if not the deepest team in the league, especially now that they have Porzingis back. So to me, Tatum is one, and he's, his case is completely solid. And of course, he's a very good defender. And then the other is Shai. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, building off of what he did last year, large role within the offense, taking more threes, which I think in a certain way, because he hasn't been hitting them at a great rate, has maybe hurt his individual efficiency. But again, he is a difference-making defender. He forces a ton of steals, is an active part of the league's best defense overall this year.
The fact that he can actually credibly make plays as the low man, and I realize people say, oh, he's the 89th best defender on his own team or whatever they like to say. A, that's not true. But B, it's not about where he is on his own team. It's where he is relative to any other ball-dominant guard in terms of what he's able to do defensively. He is unambiguously a huge plus, and he plays a role a lot of these guys, all right, Trae Young, he's not going to guard the best guy either, but then he's a huge liability if he's lower on the floor. Whereas Shai Gilgeous-Alexander comes over and he forces guys to miss. Doesn't do it the way a center does, but he is a presence. He causes problems for guys, and that allows them to pressure up so much more on the perimeter. Obviously, he gets plenty of steals himself. So, I do think that aspect of his game, he's probably overrated among the people who are just blocks and steals. But then the people who are oh no, it's not blocks and steals, those people I think probably underrated.
I think that's probably fair. And you don't have to be the most important player on the league's best defensively when you are as good as he is offensively. And I mean, as you mentioned, Shai, second to Jokic in offensive EPM. I believe he's second in offensive Raptor as well. And I think that is a fair calibration of it. He has been an important part of the Thunder offense. And it is, I think, important to know, and I think this is part of the reason why I had Gilgeous-Alexander below Jokic, why I ended up there, is that while the Thunder offense has been significantly better when Gilgeous-Alexander has been on the floor than when he has been off, they are not in the rarefied air. They're at a 118-4. And yes, there was a lot of missed threes that could have been better early in the season, and that's rectified a little bit to this point. But the Thunder offense hasn't been quite that dynamic. And when you consider that they, being without Chet Holmgren for a significant portion of the season now, that hurts you in a couple of different ways, but they were often going small instead of big. And so it isn't like losing Chet Holmgren that you're playing a ground-bound guy who can't even catch the ball. No, they were generally playing even smaller. So Shai, totally deserving. I have him second. I have him above Tatum. But to me, having him below Jokic is appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, that 118 is still, the fourth best offense in the league type of level when he's on the floor. They are a little bit worse with him on the floor defensively, but again, I don't think that's his fault. That's one of these ones where his replacement is, it's going to be Alex Caruso a lot of the time. So
sure,
that's part of that. And Shai, I mean, pretty ridiculous. He has, of any realistic contender for these awards, plus 15.1 team net rating overall when he's on the floor, which is ridiculous. And he also has the second greatest differential in team offensive rating too. That's 21. Jokic again was 34.5, by the way. But nobody else that we're talking about here is higher than 15. I did have Tatum slightly ahead of Gilgeous-Alexander. I would have those two in their own tier, and then a pretty steep drop off thereafter. But Tatum, to me, you talked about some of the stuff that he's doing. The fact that he's taking now this absurd number of threes off the dribble, hitting 37%, getting to the basket a little bit more. You mentioned his playmaking has gone up. And he also just provides a role that nobody really with this level of offense is going to provide on the defensive end as a perimeter player, because he makes their defense work in a lot of ways. And I thought even as he was struggling shooting last year, he didn't get enough credit for this in the playoffs. He's guarding centers most of the time. Like that is really fatiguing. That's really difficult. LeBron James certainly had the body to guard centers throughout his career. His teams probably wouldn't have been a lot better off if he was willing to do that. He wasn't willing to do that. Jason Tatum is willing to do that within Joe Mazzulla's system. He's been willing to do that for a while. He's gotten stronger. He's pretty big. And that frees up he's guarding centers. He's boxing out on guarding those guys in the post. That frees up the center to be more of a rim protector. He can not only guard centers, but then switch onto smaller players on the perimeter with no problem and be an asset there. So he is definitely, I think, the role that he's playing for the Celtics defensively is very underrated. And while last year's team, you didn't see the crazy on-off splits with him, you've had it every other year of his career, including this year, where they're plus 14 with him on, negative 0.5 off. Part of that is the struggles of Jaylen Brown so far this year, but still, this is a plus 14 net rating with him on the floor. That is the third best of any of these candidates. I'm sorry, second best of any of these candidates. Sorry.
And so I think we can kind of we gave sufficient appreciation to those three. And of course, they will be my top three in all NBA as well.
Yeah. And those guys also, by the way, are pretty clearly the top in estimated plus minus, pretty clearly the top in Raptor. Estimated plus minus, Steph Curry is up there too. He'll be an interesting case, but he's played 50% fewer minutes than Jason Tatum almost. So
yeah. So I will say right now, Stephen Curry has been the fourth best player in the league this year, but this is most valuable player. And so missing that much time means that you are you're not going to make the ballot. I'm not going to say you're ineligible, but you're not going to make the ballot unless you've been the best player in the league, which he has not. And so that really opens up the field because there are a number of different players that we'll talk about who are below expectations or haven't, for whatever reason, haven't quite done it. And so you're kind of left with a motley crew is kind of the way I would describe it. And so I think that you could argue a number of different players. I ended up sort of reluctantly picking Giannis fourth, and he did just have his first 40-plus point triple-double in their win on, I think that was Saturday. His role within the Bucks offense is actually higher, his total usage, than Jokic with the Nuggets, but the Bucks offense has been significantly worse. Like they're at 113.5 when Giannis is on the floor. That is significantly worse than a lot of the other players that we're talking about. And unlike in prior years, Antetokounmpo is not bringing surplus defensive value, which he did before. That was a hallmark of his MVP seasons, was that not only was he one of the most effective offensive players in the league, he was also a plus defender, including winning Defensive Player of the Year one year. So even so, I think that his argument, I think some people, especially with the recent triple-double, are maybe overstating this a little bit, but I still think I like him the best of the remaining group.
Yeah, points, rebounds, and assists is not everything. He gets a little bit of credit for just what he's been over the years. We don't need to get into here the decline in his defense, his defensive numbers, the defense when you watch him, that teams just are not scared of him anymore. His contest rate is way down compared to where he was at back in 22. That was probably really his last great defensive season. But just take my word for it at this point that there really are no defensive metrics you could point to that have him as anywhere close to an all-defense level of defender, and that's kind of been the case for the last 2 years before this. So maybe there's a point if he really gets into the playoffs and he's healthy, which we didn't see him the last 2 years, that he could really ramp that up, but this is a regular season award. But yeah, I had him here too. I also went with Anthony Davis as 4, Giannis at 5. I just didn't love either of those guys. I don't think that those guys have played at the level of, really like 4th and 5th in MVP. When you look at some of the impact metrics, like Davis has great true shooting and great, 30% usage, but also he still operates largely as a play finisher. He's had the ball a little bit more, but the playmaking usage isn't really that much higher than it's been in previous years. So and AD on his defense, again, there really are no defensive metrics that you can point to that have him as an all defense level of player this year. There are certainly individual games, such as in that OKC game over the weekend, where he can look really good and play at that level. There are others where he doesn't. That also people don't mentally catalog all of the possessions where he doesn't get back on defense. For example, he is certainly a big part of the Lakers' miserable transition defense. That's been a big part of why they've been a poor defense this year overall, although they've gotten better the last couple of games. But yeah, I mean, there isn't anyone else that like I thought is like that obviously sexy.
No.
Curry, we'll talk about him more later, but 29 minutes a game, 14 games, and the numbers are very enticing when he's out there, but he's also kind of at the point where he's playing few enough minutes that you got to discount that.
And he's missed time. And so I had one other guy in consideration who I actually put over Davis for fifth, and it's not the strongest argument for this guy either, as opposed to last year, which is
I don't feel great at any of these. Yeah, Brunson was right at the top of my All NBA second team.
And so Brunson, to me, he has a large role within a very good offense. So the Knicks have a 122 when he's on the floor, and that the Knicks have a strong offense overall because they've been good when he's been off the floor, which a lot of these teams are not. They don't fall off a cliff, so they've been better, and a lot of credit goes to a lot of different places for that. But Brunson, individually efficient, 61% true shooting on about 30% basketball reference usage, 47.5 total usage is not in the upper echelon. It's not the tippy top, but it's in the upper echelon. So he has a large role within one of the league's best offenses. And sure, he's not a good defender, but I'm largely okay with that. They have ways to clean that up and everything else. Not that they have, but I don't blame. I don't think he's been abysmal. This isn't he's sabotaging his team levels of bad defense. So for me, one of my general things is that I want people to be good at the thing that is most important for their position. And so it's so weird to say that hurt Anthony Davis, considering what an amazing defender he's been in his career. But Brunson, so he needs to be an offensive player. He is, and AD is great. And then the other part is that AD is a more dependent offensive talent than Brunson is, and Davis has been fantastic at that. But I think that generating shots in some ways is more important than converting them. But again, they're within the same tier for me. I have Brunson 5. Davis 6th. Then, I'm waiting for guys to pass them because I'm waiting for some more fantastic seasons. But yeah, I have them as the next group.
Yeah, and I had Stephen Curry in that group as well. I would tend to agree with you that maybe on a per play basis he would be fourth. And he's shooting the crap out of it again. 44% from three. What he does to the offense.
Well, and 44% on threes, taking almost 12 per 36. Exactly. That efficiency on the highest volume of any player who's in serious contention for anything like this is jaw-dropping.
Well, and he still has one of the best on-court team offensive ratings. That was a number that had actually muted the last couple of years. That is back up now, 121.7 team offensive rating. And just generally, other Warriors have shot it very well when Steph's been on the floor as well, but they are 15.9 points per 100 better offensively when he's on the floor. That is third among this group behind Jokic and Shea. And I think he's having a better defensive season this year, although they are better defensively when he's off the floor. His replacements are usually more defensive players. So, and then the other thing you can point to, even after they've had this losing skid, is overall Warriors net rating plus 13.4 when he's on the floor. That's 11.8 points per 100 better than when he's off the floor. But you're getting up to that elite number again. And, the reason to really have him above Davis and Giannis is Giannis plus 0.8 when he's on the floor in Milwaukee. And then Davis, the Lakers are actually negative when he's on the floor, and they are also actually better when he is on the bench than on the floor. So they're negative 2.4 when Anthony Davis is on the floor. I don't blame him for that necessarily, but also you're just not seeing that other than the individual scoring statistics he's putting up, which are completely ridiculous. There aren't really a ton of other statistical hallmarks of his dominance in terms of the team performance. Now, I mean, you can say there aren't that many great players in the Lakers. I've been saying that for a long time. They are over 500, although they've done that with some close wins. So I mean, Steph, if he had played a few more minutes, he would probably be 4 for me. But he's played 416,
Well,
and these other guys have played over 600.
and so I think that's a natural transition into All NBA. And remember that All NBA is still positionless. And so I am more aggressive with this than you are. But basically, my approach is if you are quote unquote eligible, it is purely most outstanding. It is who has been the best kind of per minute as long as you played enough. And so Steph Curry moves into the first team. To me, he replaces Jalen Brunson. So my first team is Jokic, Gilgeous-Alexander, Tatum, Curry, and Antetokounmpo. And then Brunson and Davis form the first 2 of my second team.
Yeah, and Brunson is up there for me as well. I mean, he's been just a little bit of a slow start, but he's been basically exactly the guy that we came to expect last year. So outside of that group, then you get into the weirdness that I would say with this year, where you've got a lot of guys who have been more established over the years who either haven't performed or have missed time. So there are a lot of new names that are in contention that we have not talked about in this lofty air so far. Guys who look really good in some of the advanced stats, maybe don't look as good in terms of their individual stats. When I say the advanced stats, I mean some of the more on-off based metrics. And a lot of guys too that you're just sort of like, all right, do I really believe it from this guy? So who do you want to talk about first in that group?
And so do you believe the numbers more, because this is not predictive. But I think that I want to start with a philosophical point, which is I know that a lot of the all-in-one metrics really value how much, like a player with a large role who boosts his team's offense, even if where they boost it to is more in the realm of fine.
It's one of my biggest disagreements with those numbers.
And so for example, I'm mentioning a player who I'm picking for an All-NBA team, just not second team. Franz Wagner is probably the most extreme here. Franz Wagner is currently he's 5th behind Curry in overall EPM so far this year, and I believe he's kind of similarly placed from Raptor. I also think that they're giving him a little too much credit for Orlando's defense. We'll talk about that later. But what Franz Wagner has done is that the Magic are a horrendous 101.6 offensive rating when he's off the floor, and that goes up to 114.5. And 114.5 is just not great. So
yeah, it's slightly above average. Now, is that an impressive lift given where the Magic are as a team in terms of their offensive talent and the fact that Paolo hasn't been available? Like, yes, I would say that it is an impressive lift, but also it's not. Do I think that Franz Wagner is one of the 10 best offensive players in basketball? No, I do not.
Agreed. And so he will be on one of my All-NBA teams, which congratulations, that's a huge step for him. But the next player that I want to discuss, and this came up a little bit in the 15 and 60, the last East 15 and 60 we did a couple weeks ago, is Darius Garland. And Garland is not quietly because his team has been awesome, but having this fantastic start to the year where individual scoring is great. He's shooting 44% on threes, taking 8 per 36, has a large but not extreme role within the Cavs offense. But the Cavs have been great offensively when he's been on the floor. And the thing that I brought up in the 15 and 60 that I want to keep an eye on is that the Cavs have been stunningly good in the minutes offensively when Garland has been on the floor without Donovan Mitchell. And there is a lot of small sample size stuff. They've been preposterous from 3 in those minutes, a lot of other things. But Garland is the sole creator. They have been very successful in those minutes. And he's been good enough defensively. He is not the reason that the Cavs defense has been as successful as it has. And they actually are worse with him on, but I think there's some noise in that too. And very similar to Brunson, where if a guard is like not great, but not terrible, you can work with it. And the Cavs clearly have.
Yeah, I think that I would say he's better defensively than Brunson. Like, he's someone that has been trusted in his career to guard point guards as long as it's not like an unbelievable player. Whereas Brunson is just being hidden constantly. And Brunson will give you a little help defense. I think Brunson's been pretty poor on the defensive end. Doesn't help that he's got to play 800 billion minutes. But yeah, I think Garland, his shooting has been unbelievable as long as he's not playing the Boston Celtics. So we'll see how he plays today. That game is underway as we record at the moment, and his passing has been awesome. But certainly the overall team efficiency numbers are there when he's on the floor. His own individual numbers are there as well from an efficiency standpoint. He's definitely their lead playmaker. So in terms of offensive estimated plus minus 4.7, that is, I believe, fifth among the players that we're talking about here. So tied for fifth, and he's listed as a negative defender by defensive VPM. I don't really put a ton of stock in that, particularly like you say, when it's unless it's someone who's just like abjectly awful and killing you, Trae Young or Damian Lillard style,
or LaMelo Ball.
Sure. So yeah, I think Garland deserved to be right in this range for me. I did not have him on my second team, but again, I struggled to delineate between my second and third team here. I do want to go back to Wagner at least. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, let's do Wagner.
What were you going to say about anything else on Garland?
No, we can move on.
Yeah. So to me, Wagner, he's just a really interesting case. Someone that I've been lower on over the years. I didn't love that they gave him this max extension. It's looking pretty good. His true shooting percentage individually is right about league average, but he's upped his usage from 25 to 30. Again, part of that being due to the fact that Paolo is out. A couple of big things about him, even though his own individual efficiency is not amazing, he is upped his 3-point percentage to 35%. He was in the 20s last year, and he's just in general is taking more of them, including off the dribble, which has really helped a lot. And then his playmaking usage is very high, right? 15.1%. That's like lower end point guard type of level, and he never turns it over either. He is just about the lowest turnover usage of anyone who we would consider a primary ball handler vying for this All-NBA. The big thing that I can point to as to why I'm not buying him as, this truly dominating offensive force is that we keep these stats here at Dunc'd On where we separate out into self-created shots, or in which you have a touch time of greater than 2 seconds, or team-created shots. And self-created shots, he is still well below average in that category. Only 47.3% e-field goal. That is well below average. And the shots that he creates are not incredibly efficient. Another stat that we keep is simple shot quality, which basically says, given where this shot is taken from on the floor and how contested it is, what would you expect a guy to shoot? Well, most stars are going to be below average of that metric. Stars take and make hard shots. Franz is taking them, not particularly making them. You would expect him to make 52.5% of the shots that he takes, and that's almost exactly what he actually does make. So he's not someone who is still a dominating individual scorer yet, and that's they have absolutely no one to replace him. That's why you see these massive on-off numbers. He's clearly the best passer on the team with Paolo out, so he's performing an important role there. He's a positive part of their awesome defense, so I think certainly in All-NBA consideration, but I think kind of lower end of second team, started third team, and what I again would consider a somewhat weak crop.
I consider it a fairly weak crop too. I have him third team, but again, the line from the seventh guy where I have Anthony Davis all the way out of the All NBA spots, they're all extremely fluid, and I mean that's just the nature of the league so far this year. So I'll bring up another guy, and the next person that I have. So I have, not that the order matters too much here. I have Garland, and then the next player is a Dallas Mavericks playmaker, but it is not Luka Doncic. And that's Kyrie Irving. And I think Kyrie Irving, you brought this up recently, that he's having this extremely underappreciated shooting season. Irving,
it's been devastating,
47% from three on 7 per 36, 63% true shooting. And he has a smaller role within the Mavericks offense than a lot of these other guys do. But that's not a surprise when you play a fair portion of your minutes with Luka. And the Mavericks have been significantly better, 7 points roughly per 100 possessions, when Kyrie has been on the floor than off. And a player who does not share that duality is Luka Doncic. The Mavs are close to even. And part of the reason why is because they've been better in the Kyrie only minutes. Like they've done a really good job. And so I think that Irving, and he's a capable defender, like sort of like what I said with Garland. He's not, a huge negative there. And so for Kyrie, I hope that this shooting continues. I don't know if it will, but I think that he has been a very important part of Dallas's success when they've had it so far this year.
Yeah, and the fact that he can play increasingly off, but also on ball, it really matters. I think he's when he doesn't have too large of an offensive load, can actually be a positive on the defensive end. And yeah, he's just shooting the crap out of the ball.
Well, he really helps the way that the Mavericks can play with pace, particularly in the non-Luka minutes, but also when he plays along with Luka Doncic, and that's extremely valuable for the Mavs.
Yeah, so for Kyrie, he's not the level of individual creator as either a passer or even, his usage is a little bit lower than some of these guys as well. So yeah, he was on my third team. I had Franz on my third team. Two guys I have not mentioned yet are on my second team. One of those is Jalen Williams, and he's probably gotten the most attention this year, I would say unfairly, with how OKC has struggled offensively when Shea has been off. And yeah, he has not been good enough in that area as like the number one guy with admittedly a lot of limited players around him as basically the only guy you can dribble who's out there. Like he's not ready to lift a team that way. And so, that's been a big criticism of ours with Jamal Murray for a long time. Like, all right, like he's a really good player when he's playing with Jokic. He's not even that this year, but you throw him out, and this is more with respect to our point guard ranking. You throw him out there with his own group, he's not capable of boosting a team that doesn't have any other creators to a great offensive performance. And Jalen Williams can't do that yet either. However, Jalen Williams has been awesome in every other possible area. I mean, the guy has been the de facto center for OKC when he's been out there, like probably half the minutes that he's been out there almost, jumping center, guarding in the post. He can switch on to guys. He can guard anyone. He can be great as a help defender. Nobody's going to beat him in isolation necessarily either. He's got that great 7'2" wingspan. And then he also is a very good off-ball shooter, shooting 39% from downtown after some very early struggles there. So he could play, he's totally fine as a number 2 offensively, just not great as a number 1. And then all of the numbers in terms of the advanced stats, really like what he's doing as well. OKC has been the best team in the league. He's been their second best player. And this isn't like second best player with some ensemble cast. Though the ensemble is very good, he's basically their only other real on-ball offensive threat besides Shea.
We're in firm agreement here. I had Jalen Williams on my third team, but again, this is very fluid. I may end up moving him up. I love Jalen Williams, and what the role that he's been asked to play defensively, I think is a very important part of the story. And he's been productive. He's actually the steal leader per 36 of anyone we've discussed. He's above Shea. He's above Franz. Franz Wagner is actually doing really well in that stat this year. So, yeah, Jalen Williams is firmly in this conversation for me.
Comfortably in the top 10 in EPM and estimated Raptor as well.
And so, and I part of the reason I did have him 13 is that he hasn't elevated it. But, I mean, in a different year, that might matter more. But there isn't really anybody who has that sterling case outside of him. I mean, Garland has done that, but he has these other deficiencies. The last player that I have on my second team is somebody we haven't discussed. And this is one of these I talked about, like, how are you feeling about the numbers? And that is Evan Mobley. Because Mobley,
he was at the end of my second team also.
Because Mobley, he's not as like overwhelmingly positive in the all-in-one metrics defensively. But let me just say he will feature in my Defensive Player of the Year conversation. And so if I believe that he is that valuable of a defensive player, I believe that you kind of manually input and you change it to be like, okay, I need to reflect this. If you're going to like lean on any one of those, whatever one you like. And so if I think he's been one of the best defensive players this year, when you combine that with Mobley's larger offensive role and that he's been effective in it, and he's been doing a little bit more drawing fouls and getting passes and all that type of stuff, that I think that overall package is second team All NBA worthy.
Yeah, I would say so as well. And he is really, really good defensively. We know that they are 7 points per 100 better when he's on the floor. They're close to a second or third best in the league when he's on the floor type of level. Now, part of the reason that they're so much better when he's on the floor is that he staggers with Jared Allen, and teams are shooting 42% on threes when Jared Allen is out there. This is actually an interesting thing to watch about the Cavs in general, is that opponents are shooting really, really well from three against them. So I expect the Cavs offense is already starting to tamp down a little bit. We'll get into a few of these potentially unsustainable performances later. But I think their defense is going to get better. And yeah, I think Mobley is certainly, he's playing a lot of center, but he can also play power forward. They're deploying him guarding guys like Jason Tatum on the perimeter. When he plays with Niang, he actually is being deployed as almost a perimeter stopper at times. Like some of those bench units that he plays with are just have nobody who can stop anybody. It's like Niang and Ty Jerome and Sam Merrill and Donovan Mitchell and him. Are like, and he's totally holding those units up. And then offensively, he's really made a ton of strides. He's actually, I posited this. I don't know that I have a way to access this, but that he is probably either number 1 or number 2 in the league in dunks off the dribble right now. Because he's added that game where he can just go through guys and shed them. You try to put a smaller player on him, he's now going to overwhelm that player physically. He hasn't really done it with the shooting as much from the outside, but he also has just become a threat where if you don't have somebody in front of him, like, he's just going to go right to the basket, knock someone out of the way, and dunk it. So he's been very effective, having the most efficient season of his career, highest usage as well, and a guy clearly a top 5 defensive player in basketball. So that is an All NBA second teamer to me.
Who else in this morass of guys, second, third team, do you want to discuss?
Well, there's one gentleman we haven't discussed yet, who I have on my All-NBA second team, and that is Victor Wembanyama.
Wow. I have him on an All-NBA team. I do not have him second. And so I guess I shouldn't say wow because he's in the round.
I mean, all these guys are the fucking same after the top 5 anyway. So really I wouldn't put too much meaning in the fact that I have him second team as opposed to third team. I mean, there's another guy that I think is going to be surprising. Maybe not to you, because obviously we are looking at the same stats on this. But I'll make the case for Victor. He's going to be my defensive player of the year. I'll tell you that right now. He's having a rim protecting season, the likes of which we've never seen. And he's not even, I'll get more into his defense I was having an interesting debate on Twitter about Wembanyama's defense right before this. I thought would be interesting to share. But Wembanyama, he takes quote unquote too many threes, but that does have value. That does space the floor for a Spurs team. They're not a great offense. He also turns it over too much. I would say that his turnovers are probably your biggest reason why he shouldn't be in this range. But he's playing more minutes this year now, 32 minutes a game, and spacing the floor from the center position does provide a lot of value, even if it's not exactly what you want him to be doing on the offensive end. But it's just the defense. Like, he's pretty clearly, to me, the defensive player of the year. This isn't a Spurs team that has so many other awesome defensive players, and yet they are defending at a top 5 type of level when he's on the floor. So that, if you're going to believe that defense has value, there's a lot there. He is,
I'll put it a different way with Wembanyama, because for those who remember, I previously had Rudy Gobert top 5 in MVP one year. Is that you can be super valuable defensively, and the idea of a kind of a heliocentric defensive player, I think is from which Wembanyama, it's a little bit different than those Gobert Jazz teams because they have some better defenders, but they don't have incredible ones. Overall, Castle deserves some credit. A few other guys do too, but even if you think, as I do, that Wembanyama is kind of so for example, if you want to say offensive EPM, I think intensely overrates what Wembanyama has done, in part because of the turnovers, though I agree with you in terms of spacing.
And it is interesting too that estimated Raptor actually has him as like a slightly negative player, whereas estimated plus minus has him in the positive.
I think that probably in my eyes, I would say Raptor might be closer to my personal opinion on this. But even if you have him as closer to neutral, he's still so good defensively that he earns a place on this list. And
I think I'll move him down to third team.
Yeah, so I have him.
As I really think about his offense a little bit more, I probably didn't consider the turnovers.
And so I want to save the Wembanyama defensive part for when we both pick him as our defensive player of the year so far. But yeah, he's been good enough on that end that if you're fine or better on offense, which he absolutely has been, well then you're in this conversation. Then from this point on, so I've named 13 of my 15 on any of the teams. I think it's kind of worth mentioning some of the other guys that I'm not picking but are in serious consideration. One of those is Luka Doncic, who I'm not picking for an All-NBA team so far.
I have picked him. Like, his brand is bad right now because he hasn't been at his usual levels, and he's been a little bit below average in terms of efficiency. But also, like, they're still really good when he's on the floor. Like, he's still like he had so far to go from his usual levels that he still is a third team All-NBA player.
I had him basically third and a half team, so I had him as he was the last guy I left off. But with Luka, I mean, he hasn't been hitting his. This is not reflected. Again, this is not predictive. Like, it's not. He hasn't been making his threes so far. He's below 33% on threes, taking a ton of them, and he has a massive role within the Mavs offense. That should be no surprise. And I think that he's been, he's been a shaky defender, but not a horrendous one. The Mavs aren't getting, crushed in his minutes relative. In fact, they've been better defensively with Luka on than off. I haven't gotten too much in the noise of that. So yeah, I have no problem with having Luka on. I think he was within this group, and he has a large role. The Mavs offense is about a 116 when he's on the floor. So that's not elite, but it is pretty good. And so yeah, he's worth mentioning here.
His playmaking is also down too. I might be convinced when I hear your case for some of these other guys to take it.
Someone else that I'm not including that some of the other stats really like, and this ties back, I'm not going to dwell too much on it, is LaMelo Ball. And LaMelo, he's been, I can argue that he's been a very valuable offensive player when you look at kind of how horrendous the Hornets have been without him. However, they haven't been that good offensively with him. And there's some talent issues there, kind of in the way that like Franz Wagner does, but I don't think it's as egregious. They're like the fact that they're not playing with a center because all their centers are hurt. That isn't really an offensive limitation in the same way, even if a play finisher really helps LaMelo. It's that he's elevated them to like an okay, even below average offense. And so for me, when you combine that with not only the defensive problems, but then he has at times been so bad defensively that he's been pulled from the game, which means that he's even less valuable because he's not.
I think that was only one time, to be fair, but
it was. I think it was twice. I
think that was more disciplinary than that. Charles Lee actually thought he wasn't going to help him in the game. But no, I agree. It's important for setting a culture, and when you see it's just watching him, especially like you started off really hot from three, started to cool off. I mean, he's had some of these. These games with like 35 field goal attempts, 38 field goal attempts. Like he, like the people who were just like idiots about Steph Curry when he just started going crazy from three, like LaMelo Ball actually does invite those criticisms in a realistic way of just like, too many threes ruining the game. Fortunately, no one really is following what LaMelo Ball is doing. And I don't even think it's necessarily a bad thing for his team that he's taking these many threes, but it just, like the way he's playing only has limited value, and it's not like they have no spacing other than him. They don't have much creation, but you would think if he was really that valuable, they would be better than a 112 offensive rating.
Exactly. I think that's completely fair. So I wanted to mention him because like a lot of the numbers do look good. I do not have him on an All NBA team. Other guys that I think are doing well.
Here, can I say who I actually have?
Sure.
Here that we haven't mentioned yet. So I do have Doncic. I do have Irving on my third team. I do have Garland. My last guy is Jaren Jackson Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Another guy that I have very much struggled with going back to 23 when the seasons, I can't remember if it was 22 or 20. It might have been 22. But like he'll have these seasons where he was unbelievable on the defensive end, but only played less than 30 minutes a game, and he fouled a lot and didn't play as many games. And so I was like, all right, how valuable is this guy really? And once again, Jaren Jackson Jr. is playing less than 30 minutes a game, and that's what Memphis has been doing. He's been healthy, so he's played 18 games, so he does have over 500 minutes, so it's a little bit less of a concern, but most of these guys are in the 600 range. And then Jaren Jackson has had maybe one of the most itinerant statistical careers that I can remember. Right?
As an offensive player?
Yeah, offensive or defensive. Because although the defensive numbers have started to normalize a little bit from where they were earlier in the season, we talked about him. I think it was 2 weeks ago. Maybe it was a week ago even. But he, started off his second season of his career, just bombing threes, hitting 40%, like one of the best big man shooting seasons of all time, shooting like 8 per 36. And then he's never shot the ball like that from the outside again. And then he gets hurt, comes back, and he's like one of the greatest statistical rim protectors we have ever seen, allowing like in the low 40s on shooting around the rim. And the Grizzlies aren't allowing anyone through. Like the numbers when he's on the floor defensively are just absolutely ridiculous. Then last year, he takes on this crazy offensive load, but he drives and he never passes. His pass rate on drives is the absolute lowest in the NBA, and he was pretty inefficient as too, but they didn't have anyone else. This year, though, the usage is still up there to where it was last year, but he's gotten much more efficient now playing on a real team again. 62% true shooting, 29 usage. That's not that far off from where Anthony Davis is, honestly.
Well, here's another one I want to mention.
Yeah.
Jaren's at 39 total usage. That is above Anthony Davis. That is also above somebody, like Derek White. It's around where where Alperen Şengün is. And they do it in different ways. But his role within the offense is he's at 33. Apologies. I was on the wrong line. I was looking at Jalen Williams, a different J. But still, that's still on the larger side. That's more than Derek White in Boston, for example.
Yeah, so he hasn't had as large of a role in terms of like the passing as AD, but it's not that far off. And then the defensive side, though, they have a 101.9 defensive rating when he is on the floor, other than the dearly departed Chet Holmgren. That's basically the best number among anybody in all NBA consideration.
By the way, I seriously consider putting Chet on my all NBA teams because he was playing at that level, but it's just, he's barely over half. And it's not so much because, and I'll mention him in another category, 2 of them actually, but it's that for all NBA, I think that's a little rich. If he had been, the 5th best player in the league, he would have made one of my teams.
Yeah. So Jackson, I mean, there's these crazy defensive splits. However, I looked at it a little bit earlier in the year, and his defensive field goal percentage around the rim was not very good at all. It's now gotten better. It's up to 52%. And then the overall opponent shooting at the rim when he's on the floor is extremely low, too. So he's starting to provide some of the hallmarks of being, again, a very valuable defensive player. And he's added this extremely efficient offense, at least individually. I'm not sure that he is really, driving great team offense necessarily. In fact, they're worse offensively when he's on the floor. But for the type of player that he is, he has a lot of value in the offensive end. He's not a premium offensive force, but you're also throwing in the defense, the floor spacing that he still provides to that position. That you got to guard him out there, even if he's not probably ever going to reach the heights of that rookie year again from the outside. And yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the numbers again, he is in the top 10 in EPM this season. He's right up there in estimated Raptor as well. So I think the biggest reason to me to not have him on there is only 28 minutes a game and only 510 minutes. But the fact that he's at least been healthy for pretty much every one of their games, it's easier to play well on defense when you don't have to play as many minutes. It's easier for Steph Curry to play well on offense when he doesn't have to play as many minutes too. So that does play into this some. Like I do discount you not only in that your minutes are you just don't provide as much value, but also that it's easier. Like what you say, okay, what would the rate stats be for some of these other guys if they only had to play 30 minutes instead of 35, right? Like could Giannis be like a much better defensive player, for example, if he's only playing 30 minutes? But yeah, I think he was kind of snagged that last spot to me, but open to arguments elsewhere too.
I don't have as many great ones as some might, in part because two of the high-profile centers, I'm just not as persuaded by their case. So Karl Anthony Towns is having this ridiculous offensive season. 65.5% true shooting. He's drilling his threes, though he's not taking a ton of them. But when you have been a terrible defender and you play the most important defensive position, I will not put you on an All-NBA team, at least right now. Like, I just can't do it. I'm not comfortable with that. He does the most important thing in his position so terribly that his team has to like struggle through, even though they've been great offensively at times. And I don't give him as much credit for their offense as I do Jalen Brunson, personally, as much as he does.
No, I mean, it just the as good as he's been on the offensive end, like his the defensive numbers are just so bad. And, again, he's playing center. Like, if he's playing power forward and putting up these offensive numbers, okay, then I might be more persuaded. But, yeah, I do think that offense is fairly damaging. So have you said who the last guy is?
I'll tell you the last guy. The last guy for me is an offense-only player, but Damian Lillard has been very good offensively so far. He's overall 61% true shooting. The Bucks are at a 115 offensive rating when he's on the floor. It's been imperfect in part because his defense has been shaky. Well, worse than shaky. It's been bad overall. And I don't love having Lillard here. And that's why, I thought you were maybe hoping that I would convince you. Like, I don't really think that anybody else is here. I know people would have maybe
I think his defense is too bad and the on-court offensive rating is not good enough for me to have him.
I mean, for me, it's just that he was kind of the best of a weak crop. Maybe I should actually. I'm going to move Luka over him.
Can I throw you out some other candidates?
Absolutely.
I mean, I still think Anthony Edwards deserves to be in this discussion as well. The Wolves' offense actually has been better this year. Like we talked about some of the limits with his distribution, but also like his teammates really are not hitting shots. Like, I think he's like teams really load up against him a lot, and he's not like diming guys up for layups, but a lot of the shots he's setting up are threes that I think his teammates are missing. Like, certainly his playmaking usage could be higher. But when we get into most disappointing players, like, I think actually for their offense to be where it is with how everyone else has played around him, like, is somewhat of an accomplishment. And, the number of threes that he's taking is pretty massive. He's shooting 42% on those. And they still, like, he hasn't had as good of a defensive season this year, but I don't think he's the problem with them either. So he's in that mix for me. Derek White would be in there as well. I mean, I think he's been the second best Celtic this season. They've had a lot of great guys as we talked about. He's right in this mix for me. Kevin Durant would be. I know he's only played 11 games. Devin Booker, I would say too. Not having his best season, but his playmaking usage is pretty high. He's had a tough lift with KD and Beal out recently. But I think I would say, like, I think Booker's been better than Lillard. Like, Lillard has just been so awful on defense. I moved
Luka into this spot, and I took Lillard out. I think that I've been sufficiently convinced. A couple other just guys that were worth mentioning, kind of in this range. Alperen Şengün is in EPM Darwin.
Yeah, if he was just finishing the way he did last year, he would be on my team.
I mean, he's at 54% true shooting, which is below average for the league. Center below
center. But we should note, I mean, the on-off numbers for him in terms of the offense, like, I mean, he is their best playmaker. Like, he provides an offensive fulcrum. They're 104 on offense when he's off and 118 when he's on.
I mean, and I will say,
talent around him, that's a nice lift.
Significantly closer to putting Şengün on an All-NBA team than I am Fred VanVleet. And I think that Şengün has been a more important part of it defensively. Apportioning credit with Houston defensively is tricky.
Yeah,
it's come up a little bit.
VanVleet, by the way, just so we have it, he's really high in a lot of the defensive advanced numbers in terms of like the EPM and estimated Raptor. But and he's good, but I like he's got 50% true shooting and 19 usage. Like he's a very valuable player for them. He's not an All-NBA player.
No, he's not. And it's striking to me that that's the case, that he's so high in these, because it's not like his steal rates are incredible, and the Rockets are defending at a relatively similar level. That might be because of some shooting luck and everything else that some of these all-in-ones encompass. But yeah, he's way too high in that respect. And then, so I wanted to mention the two Rockets because they're having such a good year. They have the number 2 record in the West as we're recording this podcast. And yeah, I mean, there are a number of guys. You brought up KD. I would have mentioned that, like John Morant, were players who, if they can play a higher portion of the next section that will probably usurp a bunch of guys to get into All NBA consideration. They just haven't yet, and so we'll see what can happen with them. I'm hopeful that we get some great players playing more games. That would be very exciting for me, and see some guys play better.
Yeah, let me just make sure there isn't anyone else that I think we really need to talk about here. Yeah, I mean, probably my biggest apology would be to Edwards. Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox have both having pretty decent seasons. The overall Kings offense hasn't been good. I don't think it's their faults. It's the faults of the guys around them who are just not able to make a shot. James Harden might get some love just because the Clippers have been better than expected and he's the identifiable star. Number one, he's not even the best player on his own team. That would be Ivica Zubac. And they're just doing it with defense. Like, they're the 24th ranked offense. He does boost their offense a little bit, but his 1.8 offensive EPM is not really an All NBA consideration. He's got some positive defensive numbers. I don't put a ton of stock in that, as you might guess. And he's getting to the foul line enough because if you give James Harden just enough on-ball reps, he's going to grift his way to a certain number of fouls. But his efficiency in every other respect, below average from 3, terrible from 2. He's like in the low 40s from 2, turning it over a fair amount as well. So like he's still a guy who can capably operate an offense, but like he's being asked to do way too much right now. He doesn't give you anything on defense. Like, he's just not any kind of a serious All-NBA consideration to me. And we should probably talk about LeBron James too, Danny.
For All NBA?
Well, for why he is not in consideration for All
NBA. I figured we would do that in most disappointing player, but we can do it now if you want.
No, I think we should, because it's like he's been a fixture in All NBA since his second season. I think I think this would be the first year he hasn't made All NBA. Maybe he had like an injury year where he didn't make it one year, but that's I mean, the numbers are incredibly stark. Maybe you can go through a few of them, and I'll supplement if I see anything else.
Yeah, so LeBron, so individual scoring, 59% true shooting on 28 basketball reference usage. That 28 basketball reference usage would be the lowest since his rookie year. It's actually only narrowly above his rookie year. And James, I think the most striking thing with a lot of this stuff is just how poorly the Lakers have played offensively when he's been on the floor. And then there's some shooting stuff and all this, of course. But the Lakers are at a 110.5 offensive rating with James on. That is significantly worse than they are when he is off the floor. And then the other thing that has really I've noticed about LeBron is that there have been some exceptions. But broadly speaking, his defensive impact has been significantly muted too. And so he has a large role within the offense, but the offense hasn't been that good. And he's been worse on defense, and that's really mattered.
Yeah, the Lakers did have a top 5 offense at one point. That's fallen off in recent games. And if you look at overall EPM, not great, 1.0. He's substantially negative on defensive EPM for one of the first times in his career. Now, it's worth noting that he's getting completely fucked by opponent shooting luck and his own team shooting luck as well. Part of that is his own shooting, but the Lakers are shooting 41% from 3 when he is off the floor and 35% when he's on. And then opponents are shooting like 39% when he's on, but only 28% when he's off. So, but even if you look at the on court where he is a negative 6.9 net rating, like, that's not all shooting. Like, a little bit of it is, the on off stuff, like the off stuff is what's being most impacted by the shooting luck. The on a little bit less so. On Lakers shooting 35%, opponents shooting 39%. Like, that's not something crazy that we've never seen before, and doesn't explain all of why they are a negative 6.9 when he's on the floor. Like, he just overall hasn't been able to impact the game offensively as a scorer, as a strategic fulcrum on the offensive end. Playmaking usage is still very high, but overall, he just you haven't felt him, and then you haven't really felt him on the defensive end either. So, he hasn't been a bad player. I think a lot of these numbers are going to normalized. He still is an efficient offensive player who also is a very good passer. Like, he's not a bad player, but I think this is the first year that you can say, like, all right, he's probably not a number one offensive option on a good offense anymore. They've had other guys who are able to step up, like Reeves and Davis, and they've been effective offensively. But yeah, he has no real statistical argument whatsoever to be in the top 15 players in the NBA.
Agreed, wholeheartedly. I will give you the choice. We have a number of awards that are kind of, I would say, a similar kind of level with Defensive Player of the Year, Coach of the Year, Rookie of the Year. Which of those do you think is the most interesting conversation?
Well, we teased it already. Let's get into Defensive Player of the Year.
Absolutely. And so Defensive Player of the Year, to me, you're looking at a number of kind of different elements in play. It's but overwhelmingly for the two of us, unlike certain people, voters in certain years, we are focused more on bigs, because the idea is that they impact the game a little bit more directly. Because they can contest all these shots at the rim. They can affect not only the shots that players take, but also the shots that they do not take, which deterrence can be an extremely important part of rim protection and everything overall. And also because it's harder to scheme around them. So, for example, if you are a great perimeter defender, well, maybe they'll run the action with somebody else, or they'll run a good screen and get you off, or something else like that. So that means we can be a little bit more apples to apples, even though there's still a lot of different ways that bigs can be good or bad defensively. And so, like, again, that's not to say, like, and at least to me, in part, some of the smalls haven't been as unbelievable defensively. So, like, they're not really in the conversation. And so I think we've already mentioned some of the stats, but Victor Wembanyama's rim protection numbers, he's a clear-cut number one for me, but they've been incredible.
Yeah, I mean, they're just totally and almost entirely unprecedented at this point in time in terms of just the way that he impacts shots that are taken around the rim. 40% opponent field goal percentage allowed at the rim. Contest percentage is about average for a center, 33.5%. Opponent 2-point percentage is very, very poor against the Spurs. A little bit of that is bad luck on outside jumpers. But Wembanyama is number one in our rim protection wins stat. He is number two behind Chet Holmgren, who probably he's the only guy who's played well enough to have potentially.
By the way, Holmgren is my number two for Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah.
I felt like we need to appreciate what Holmgren did. This will be the last time, unfortunately, that he gets mentioned in this space. He arguably was the best defender of the first month of the season. It's just that he hasn't really had a second month. Yeah,
so Victor is just another flavor of rim protected than anyone that we've seen. Opponents are shooting also only 57% at the rim just in general when he's out there. Now, they are taking a few more shots at the rim than for the absolute best guys, like Ivica Zubac, for example. Opponents take 28.6 rim attempts per 100 with him on the floor, and with Victor, it's 32. So that's still a fine number, but it's not one of the absolute best in the NBA. And this is where I kind of got. Oh yeah, there's one other crazy stat here that I wanted to get into as well for Victor. He's averaging 3.6 blocks per 36. It's been a while since we've seen a guy at that level. That's a huge number. Mutombo and those guys were averaging 5 back in the day, but that was it was a different game at that point. Wembanyama is also averaging 7.8 rim contests per 36. So some of his blocks are coming on the perimeter, but that's still an insane ratio. 3.6 blocks per 36, 7.8 rim contests per 36. So it's basically, it's not quite at this level because he does block some shots to the perimeter, but he's close to like 40% of all shots that he's contesting at the rim, he's blocking them.
It's incredible. Just briefly on Holmgren. So we're totally agreed. Victor's number one. Holmgren, you brought up what Wembanyama contesting 7.8 per 36. Chet Holmgren, when he was playing, contested 11.4, and opponents only shot a slightly better 43% on the attempts that Holmgren contests. And when you consider that volume going up, That's really impressive.
Yeah, and the rim attempts are lower than with Holmgren than with Victor. So
and teams shot a horrendous...
actually, no, I'm sorry.
No, they're
that
higher.
Is incorrect. That is incorrect.
No.
I was looking at Hartenstein. Sorry about
that. Holmgren, they're higher, but teams did poorly on them. Some of that goes to some of the other guys on the Thunder being surprisingly adept rim protectors so far. We'll see how that continues overall. But Holmgren's number 2. And then
let me finish up on Victor. Sorry.
Sorry.
I had no, it's okay. I understand why you thought I was ready to move on, but there have been a lot of those times, so I'm not ready to move on yet in this history of this podcast. But because I teased this earlier, and some guy, I don't know who he was, like old school writer who claims that he hand tracks every single one of Victor's possessions, and he assigns 1 through 10 grade for him, and he's like, this game was a 5, this game was a 6, and this game was an 8, and like how could he be defensive player of the year? Dyson Daniels should be the defensive player of the year, and we've been through it with Marcus Smart a million times. Like, the season that Victor is having is a more valuable defensive season than any perimeter player has had in the history of the NBA. I feel entirely comfortable with that. That's just the nature of big man defense. They just affect so many more shots because of their rim protection responsibilities. And the thing is, though, so this guy, he's basically just saying, all right, did you perform your assignment or not? I guess, so I'm going to make a metric based on that, and that's going to determine who I think is the best defensive player. And the point I tried to make to him is, well as you can in 280 characters, was I totally agree with him that Victor Wembanyama is not some great pick and roll defense technician, that he does make mistakes, that he does have lapses, he doesn't get back on defense, he doesn't contest every shot that he possibly could. And that's why it's so batshit crazy that all of these numbers say what they say, that he actually is just scratching the surface. But the physical tools are just so ridiculous, and people are so fucking terrified of him. And yeah, when you also just block 3.6 shots per 36, like, that matters a lot too. Like, you're just sending it back.
And there's also an important part of it that, like, I'll use a jazz analogy that's about the notes that you don't play, like the deterrence and the shots that teams don't take and everything else like that he gets by being there and by being a threat. I mean, so one way of putting this is that, so the Spurs play a traditional 5 when Wembanyama's not on the floor. They play Zach Collins. When Wembanyama's on the floor, opponents take 32.6% of their shots around the rim. That's actually around league average. But that goes way up when Zach Collins is on the floor. And they look at the percentage, they make 60% of the shots. This is including the glass. When Wembanyama's on the floor, that goes up to 66% when Zach Collins is out there. And when you think that while the surrounding talent is not identical in the ons and the offs there, that shows you a little bit about what he's impacting in terms of the shots that opponents take and the shots that opponents make.
Yeah, and Victor also gets a ton of deflections as well for a center. So yeah, your number 2 is going to be Holmgren. Like, I agree, he's right up there with Victor. I just, because he only played 265 minutes, I couldn't get to the point of including him. Mobley was my number 2.
He's my number 3.
Yeah, so you could go ahead and make the case for him, just because I had my reason for not doing Chet.
Yeah, so Mobley, I think that he's been a very good rim protector overall. His contest percentage, 33%, is strong for a straight 5, and the how teams shoot when he contested, pretty good. Not the best, but pretty good. But what Mobley brings that the other guys don't, and when none of the other players, and I'll mention right now, my also considereds, because I don't have a third spot, the 2 main guys for me were, in no particular order, Brook Lopez and Ivica Zubac, who are doing the traditional big man stuff very well. But what Mobley brings that those guys do not, and becomes a version of a tiebreaker, is the defensive versatility. And so Mobley can be he can be a perimeter defender, and he's done a good job with that. And Cleveland has tasked him with that at times. And he can also play the 4 defensively, which some of these other guys probably could not. And so for me, Mobley gets kind of that added boost because, and I brought up the contest percentage, 33% that's solid for a big. That's very similar to what Victor Wembanyama has, but he's playing the 4 a lot. And you think about how that helps Cleveland's defense, that you can have a power forward who can be that powerful, who also slides to the center and is a very good defensive center.
Yeah, and then you also consider too that they're 107 defensive rating with him on, and opponents are shooting 38% from three against them. So you knock it down a couple of points to league average, and you're talking about a league leading level of defense with Evan Mobley on the floor. And we talked about this in All NBA, that there just are not really that many great defensive players around him on the Cavs. And he's just as basically had to anchor units that with George Niang is like his most often his partner at power forward when it's not Jared Allen. You didn't mention the guy that I actually had at number 3, and this is another instance, just like with Luka Doncic, where this guy had so far to fall that even though some people might argue it's a disappointing season for him, he still deserves to be number 3 for me. And I'm going to double check this in a second here. But I believe that the Minnesota Timberwolves actually have a better defensive rating with Rudy Gobert on the floor this year than they did last year.
I'll look at it. I think it's a little bit worse, but it's not as far off as many would think.
Yeah, so it's 107-2 this year. They're 7.6 points per 100 better when he's on the floor. That is a crazy number, obviously. So it's really has been the drop-off when Gobert's on the bench that has been almost entirely responsible for Minnesota's decline on the defensive end. Gobert also 34 minutes a game, doesn't miss games.
So could I give a quick stat on that? I think this is incredible. Yeah. So this is per Cleaning the Glass, so it has a little bit of a garbage time filter. The Wolves' defense has been very similar. So within a point per 100 possessions from when Gobert is on the floor. However, their non-Gobert defensive rating has gotten 10 points per 100 possessions. Exactly 10 worse.
Yeah, I on NBA.com is 7.6 worse, but yeah, for filtering out garbage time, it's even worse. And so Gobert's number is still totally solid.
Sure.
Particularly,
I should put him in my also considered.
I'm particularly in the way that he depresses shots at the rim. I think he's got a little bit better. You know, he's allowing a little bit worse in terms of field goal percentage allowed at the rim than Brook Lopez, 53 to 49%. But opponent volume at the rim is the same. And then I think Rudy Gobert also just has a lot more defensive versatility, and he's played a little bit more than Lopez, although Lopez, again, deserves a ton of credit for somehow basically playing the most minutes per game of his career, I think, this season.
So Lopez, part of what I really liked about his defensive season is that the Bucks have had the ratings are a little bit are worse than you would like for a defensive player of the year candidate. But there's a lot of opponent shooting luck in that with 39% on opponent threes. That's one of the higher numbers of any player on this list. And so if you expect that to regress to the mean, then that will make this look a little bit better. And also it's such a jarring change from where things were a couple of years ago, but the surrounding defensive players for the Bucks are way worse than they were. And that's not just Drew Holiday for Damian Lillard as a swap. That is no Chris Middleton. That is Giannis being a worse defender than he was before. So Lopez has a bigger lift, and I think he's doing a respectably good job.
Yeah, I just think ultimately I don't see a ton of difference in the numbers between those two or Ivica Zubats for that matter, but I just think Gobert is a little bit better of a player. And also it's a little bit of a contrarian pick to note that, like, oh yeah, by the way, like hasn't been quite as dominant this year, and he also has had, I think, some emotional screw ups that he seems to be prone to from time to time. So yeah, that's well. Just to recap, I had Victor, Mobley, and Gobert, and yours were
Wembanyama, Holmgren, Mobley, and then also consider it's Lopez, Zubats, Gobert.
All right, I'll let you pick where we're going next here.
It's always a weird time to do Coach of the Year because a lot of coaches are doing a good job, but things haven't fully kind of normalized or separated. And so I'm just going to mention a bunch of people right now that I think are doing a very good job and that it was hard to pick between them. And this will include my top 3, but I'm just going to mention a number of different guys. Kenny Atkinson, coach of with Cleveland, that they've been able to kind of take a step up with largely the same talent and with Max Strus being out. I think that's a really impressive job. Joe Mazzulla, without one of their most important players, Kristaps Porzingis, they've still been an unbelievable team. They've been able to execute all the stuff defensively. Ty Lue, the Clippers being as good as they are defensively, I generally give a lot of that credit to a coach. Jamal Mosley, similar there. Like, neither one of those teams has been amazing offensively, but they've been able to be competitive because they've been so good defensively. Mark Daigneault has then had to handle basically having his centers out for most of the season so far and had made it work in an unconventional way. They've been the league's best team, in my opinion, so far. That's super duper impressive. And Ime Udoka, with again, defense being largely credited to the coach. I think that he's done a great job maximizing the guys
and
he has.
offense too, right? Like, they've really blasted the offensive glass, and that's been the biggest reason why they've been able to be a respectable offense, and that's been a huge part of why they've been able to take this step forward. And a lot of that is a strategic decision.
I think that the Pistons' massive improvement is a lot of that is just removing the non-NBA caliber players from their rotation and replacing them with NBA caliber players. Shout out to Killian Hayes.
They removed the non-NBA caliber coach from the rotation.
Exactly.
Too.
And so JP Bickerstaff is in this conversation for me as well. Like, the Pistons have done a really good job defensively. They've gotten buy-in top to bottom, and they're just outside the top 10 right now on defense, on percolating the glass. And so I think he's done a really good job. And none of those guys, though, are the person who I have number one. And
Can I guess?
Sure.
Taylor Jenkins?
Absolutely. The Memphis Grizzlies are 4th in offense and 6th in defense right now, and their best players played barely half the season.
No, it's pretty remarkable. And Jenkins, it was a down year last year, and you kind of wondered, like, all right, could he be in trouble? They moved on from his staff. Well, I'll give him a lot of credit for working with that new staff. I'm not sure how much of the hand it was of a hand he had versus the front office had in selecting some of this new staff. But obviously, for the Grizzlies to be at this level offensively is absolutely insane, given the available talent that they've had.
Can I give a stat on that briefly?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, John Morant, who, if I was, a little bit more aggressive on my 50% rule, like, he would have maybe gotten all NBA consideration. They have a 113.5 offensive rating when he is not on the floor. And remember that Desmond Bane missed some of the same time that John Morant did. So this isn't a circumstance where, they had this other good player who really stepped up. Like, they've been able to make it happen, and they've been a great offensive rebounding team this year. They've gotten to the line even when John Morant has been on the floor. It's really impressive how well Jenkins has not only worked within the limitations, but also put players in a position to succeed. Like, Zach Edey is a very different center than some of the other guys they played. I thought they did a nice job incorporating and integrating him. And then when Edey was kind of not doing as well, then he shifted to the bench and everything else. And so, like, Jenkins, he's had to pull some tough levers, and I think he's done a really, really good job of it.
Yeah, when a team has a lot of depth and a lot of really good players, like the coach deserves a lot of credit for that. I was starting to say that Thomas Tuchel, the Finnish guy who was coaching in Paris last year and has brought over some really interesting new offensive concepts. I'd like to get into it in greater depth at some point in the relatively near future, but he certainly deserves a lot of credit. Jenkins deserves a lot of credit for working with him. And I kind of think that these Coach of the Year awards are kind of staff awards.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm not going to be like, Sean Sweeney's really good, so I'm going to discount Jason Kidd and Coach of the Year. But I don't think that way. Like, the head coach makes the decision and he empowers that guy, and that guy works under his aegis. So, I mean, Jenkins, especially at this time of the year, anyone would be a reasonable choice. I tend to default to just, who do I think is the best coach in basketball? And Joe Mazzulla, to me, has just shown that to be the case. Again, no Kristaps Porzingis, even when they don't have the 5-out spacing. They've been able to dominate this year. They're right up there as the best team in basketball. I don't know that was like so obvious, right? Like, the Celtics, like, they killed it last year. They killed it in the playoffs. They're obviously they're going to kill it again. Like, no, that's not obvious that they're going to just do that with Kristaps Porzingis. It's not obvious, like, that even with Jaylen Brown kind of struggling this year, that they were just going to, like, run roughshod through the league to the point where it's a surprise when they lose any game. And yeah, their defense hasn't been quite as good, but he's been, I mean, do you remember, Danny, there was a time when it was like, the clogged toilet offense, like the Celtics, all they do is hold the ball. They never move it. And, instead now they have one of the most free flowing offenses with the quickest decision making. Some of that's some new personnel that they brought in. And then Joe also just like, I would say that his arrogance as a coach, which he was derided for early in his career, has ultimately has paid off. Like, they shoot too many threes. Like, well, no, actually, they're just like running you out of the gym yet again.
I mean, 125 offensive rating, and they've been missing one of the most important offensive players of almost the entire year.
It's insane. So like he's number one to me. Mark Daigneault is number two again. I mean, OKC is just, and I also just give a little bit more credence, as we kind of do in the MVP, of like, can you boost your team all the way up into the top end? And I try not to just like forget about guys, right? Because it's like, oh, now it's they surprised last year. And now I just assume that they're at this level.
Like,
and
that happened to Budenholzer for such a long time.
Yeah. So Daigneault's number two for me. Atkinson, I think, has to be number three with the Cavs start that they've had, and getting incredible stuff. Like, some of it, again, is they've had some crazy shooting luck on their own offense. But like the way that he's unleashed Evan Mobley, like getting Darius Garland back, working as well as he has. Like, Donovan Mitchell hasn't even played that well. Like, we didn't even mention him in All NBA. Like, he doesn't. Really
I had him in my also considered, but it was in the bottom end of that. I'm firmly in agreement that Atkinson's high on this list. I actually had a different third, and I'm going to give the context for it. I don't think of him as the same level of coach as some of these other guys, and you and I have slightly different priorities here. And it's Jamal Mosley, and I think that coaches do the most to impact their team defensively. And a piece of context that we sometimes forget with how great the Magic's defense has been is that some of the players that we thought of as their best defenders haven't been available. Wendell Carter has been battling injuries this entire year. And even though they have at times Goga Batadze, they have Isaac at times, it's been incredible to see.
It doesn't matter who they have available. It seems like now they've unleashed Anthony Black this year too. That's really helped, like him replacing Cole Anthony. But like part of the reason they're good on defense is if you don't defend, you're just not going to play for him at all.
But they've been so good defensively that the Magic they're 15-7 with a +6 net rating, despite being a bottom 10 offense. And when you consider the available talent, being a bottom 10 offense is not a demerit for Jamal Mosley. They just don't have dudes. And so they've been able to make it work. And a part of that, is like, how well do you coach the players you have? And so I think that Mosley deserves a lot of credit. Again, I'm not saying that he's the third best coach in the league. I have him third here, but I think that he has done a really good job getting his players to play. And when you consider, there was a point after Paolo Banchero got hurt where it looked like they were just going to really fall off. They've completely righted the ship. And they've done it not just by beating bad teams. They've beaten some good teams too.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this actually on Friday. We just ran out of time to talk about this game because there are so many other ones. But if you get a chance with the Magic game and it's on League Pass, throw your headphones on, because he'll usually try, particularly when his team is playing defense on the other end of the court from the bench, he'll stand basically right in front of the scorer's table and he'll yell 10 things per possessions. Stuff like, hey, stay down, Goga, right? Like, stay in a stance when he's playing pick and roll defense. Like, don't stand up too much. Or Jet Howard, a guy was trying to drive past him. And he says, show hands, just to make sure that he doesn't get a foul on that straight line pathway play. And he'll obviously call out the play that he thinks is going all right. He'll call out the coverage over under. Not that this is a unique thing. Some coaches do that. Like, Jamal Mosley is very hands-on in basically every way that you can be as a coach, as kind of a younger guy. And so again, like, it's not like no one has ever thought of doing this stuff before, but I thought it was interesting to see that, just like how locked in he is on the details and how locked in this team is on the details. And, certainly ever since he's gotten there, they've punched well above their weight defensively. Like, these guys don't have the best defensive talent in the league, I would say, but everyone out there really defends. And then even the guys who have limitations, like, for example, like Paolo Banchero was just a fucking disaster defensively at Duke. And he's been like a totally good player for them. He's only played 5 games this year, but I didn't think Franz Wagner was going to be some unbelievable defender either. He's been really good. And then the guys who are like true wrecking balls, like, he's elevated even them to another level. So he's not in my top 3, because I don't think he is a top 3 coach in the whole league. I just do it differently than the, like, who's surprised the most based on the available personnel, but certainly it has an argument. And I don't say that my criteria is the be all end all by any means. Our
Yeah.
to be overall.
Nate, is there anyone else? So I brought up, in addition to the kind of who we each have kind of had as our top five, I brought up Ime Udoka, JB Bickerstaff, Ty Lue. Is there anyone else that you think merits mention in this conversation?
Did you say Jody Fernandez?
I did not, but that's
Yeah,
totally fair.
I mean that's for the Nets to be 9-11 and to it seems like the injuries might finally be catching up to them, but to beat Golden State and Phoenix back to back on the road, I mean they've been incredible. To get these guys to be like a reasonable offense given the available personnel, the fact that they have nobody who can pass at all, like this is just it's been a remarkable performance. They're going to trade guys away. They're going to fall off anyway with some of the injuries they have. But
I'm really happy you mentioned him.
And Mitch Johnson, I think you got to give a little bit of credit to,
Sure.
coming in a difficult situation with Greg Popovich on medical leave and the Spurs exceeding expectations.
Okay, I'll give you the choice. What do you want to go next?
Yeah, let's do one more before we have to go. We'll have to take this to a part two, but this has been really, really fun to discuss. Let's get to. We might actually have time to do rookie and sophomore. So let's start with rookie, and it's a time-honored truism that rookies are terrible, and no time has that been more honored than in the 2024-25 season.
The general rule is that I hope for there to be 3 rookies who are positive players in whatever respect they can be. I will say I think this season has met that threshold. It only narrowly, but by a little bit. But one of the differences is that the ones that have, even if a couple of them have really exceeded expectations, haven't done it by that much. And I think that for me, the reasonably clear-cut rookie of the year so far is Jared McCain. And McCain rising from being a backup to being a starter based on his own play rather than injuries. I mean, injuries were part of why he got the opportunity, but he's had a large role, in part because Joel Embiid's been out, within the Sixers offense, and he's been effective as an individual player for a guard, 59% true shooting on 27% basketball reference usage. That is the highest usage for anybody who is in rookie of the year, or even we're not doing all rookie at this point, would be an all rookie consideration. So he's been effective in that. The Sixers haven't been amazing when he's been on the floor offensively, but they've been better than they are when he's been off. And when a guy kind of transitions from being a starter, back up to a starter, they can do that. And McCain, part of how he's doing it is that he's shooting 37% on threes, taking 9 per 36, which is a very high rate. And so when you take 9 per 36, some of them are going to be difficult. And like you and I have been very impressed by how he doesn't turn the ball over as much as you'd expect. He has kind of good patience and good judgment. And so I think that McCain to me, part of he actually isn't the highest in EPM or Raptor of any rookie, but I think that I factor in more is the role that you have. He's had a big role. He's done pretty well.
Yeah, the other guy that you would put into this mix is Dalton Connect, but McCain's role has been so much bigger. I don't think either of them has a particular advantage over the other on defense. I mean, Connect has been crazy efficient, 65% true shooting 44% from three. He's been getting them up to, but he's basically just been a play finisher, a very efficient one. But he's just his role is to just shoot the ball as soon as it touches his hands, maybe drive to the basket in transition. That's about it. Whereas McCain has really had to be the key offensive player for the Sixers, and yeah, is he pushing them to an unbelievable offense? When he's out there, no, probably not. Although they've looked better since they actually started featuring him, because they were just totally in the mud before that. And yeah, I mean, to have that big of a role within the offense and still be efficient as a rookie, putting up efficient 20-point games, like 7 or 8 in a row, something like that. Yeah, so he would be it for me. Connect, a clear number 2.
Yes.
And then Zach Edey was number 3 for me, just by default, because even though he's now coming off the bench and he also got hurt, there's just really no one else you could point to as being really a positive for their team at this point in time.
There are 2 other guys that I want to shout out, but for being at least close in this conversation. One of them is Edey's teammate, Jalen Wells, who took on a larger role with the backcourt absences that the Grizzlies had, and he's 58% true shooting, and his role within the offense is way lower than Jared McCain's is, but he's done a reasonably good job. And when you consider how shorthanded the Grizzlies were, like he's had to take on more of a role than he probably should have, taking 7 threes per 36 and making 39% of them. And then the other guy who isn't as loved in some of the overall metrics, but I've been a big fan of, is AJ Mitchell. And the reason why a lot of them don't like him is that the Thunder offense hasn't been great when Mitchell's been on the floor. They have been great defensively. But for me, it's the fundamental question of like, how much can you really elevate this group? But Mitchell, he's making his threes at a reasonably good, at a really good rate, like 42%. But he's making good passes, a good decision. So for me, he has been a positive player overall. So for me, yeah, I agree with you on the order: McCain, Connect, Edey, and then I wanted to give mentions to Wells and AJ Mitchell.
Yeah, like Donovan Clingan and Stephon Castle are both guys who deserve at least some discussion. Sure. Castle's averaging 27 minutes a game. He stepped into the starting lineup for San Antonio. He's at least not been killing them. Like, they've been a decent team. He's been starting for them. The individual offensive numbers are just too bad, though, for him. True shooting 7 percentage points below the league average, shooting 29% from downtown. He has been, probably the best defensive rookie on the perimeter by a fairly wide margin. And Clingan has had some games where he's been able to impact around the rim, but only 17 minutes a game. And, now he's going to be out for 2 months as well, probably with this MCL issue. And he also really struggled offensively to be efficient. So, I could see Wells or Castle taking my third place spot over Zach Edey. But Edey at least has been, like, he hasn't played as large of a role, but I think he's also been more effective within that role. I mean, 65% true shooting and 20% usage it is very, very good and effective. And they've just kept him out of matchups that he can't handle.
And it's important to mention that he didn't even get the most favorable ecosystem because of some of the injuries. Like, we thought it could be even more favorable for Edey, but with Job being in and out, Bane being in and out, it's been harder for him. And so I think that's, it's a consideration. I don't know that he would have gone above third if you add in that additional context, but it's important to note. And as you said, I think we have enough time to do best sophomore. Number one here, without too much of a fight, should be Victor Wembanyama. He is the only person that both of us had on an All-NBA team who is a sophomore, so he should be number one by clear amount. We've talked about him.
I think the last sophomore that I had on one of my All-NBA teams would have been Luka in 20.
I think that's right. Number two for me is Chet Holmgren. I mentioned that he would have been an All-NBA consideration for me had he played enough. And so I'm mentioning him here for best sophomore because he was the second best sophomore. We just unfortunately won't see him for a while.
Yeah, and he's way better than the rest of these guys. The rest of these guys are role players. Like Chet Holmgren was playing at an all-star level. So I'll take 10 games of all-star over 20 games of solid role player.
And so, Nate, I'm interested. So for me, the next two in either order are Brandon Miller and Derek Lively. And it's fascinating to think about those two in terms of like a best sophomore because their roles are so different from each other.
Yeah, I would throw Amen Thompson into that group as well. I did go with Derek Lively the second. Brandon Miller just hasn't been efficient enough. He hasn't been on a real team. He also missed some time early in the season. I think he missed about 2 weeks with that glute issue. Lively's missed some time too. But I think, Lively is just, and also I feel comfortable with what he is because we saw it last year in the playoffs. He's just been like a very high quality starting center on a winning team. And, Amen Thompson is playing a lot of minutes. He's coming off the bench, still has a lot of offensive limitations. He certainly has been contributing to the Rockets, although a lot of that has been in bench units. He probably would be, if all defense were the way it used to be, he would probably be in consideration for all defense, which we don't do until the end of the year. So he would be right up there too. I mean, it's just like a guy who's just a really effective player on a winning team. And Miller, different role, shooting a lot of threes, making a reasonable amount of them, overstretch in terms of his offensive role at times when he's not playing with LaMelo. So like, I think he's right on track, but also I don't think it's been like some wow year for him. And if I'm trying to actually like win basketball games on a good team, I would rather have Lively than him.
Yeah, and we saw the importance of Lively even on a good team the difference between him and Gafford, and so like Lively, it's not even just like the blocked shots or anything like that. He's a more adept defender, like he's a little bit more intuitive, and we've seen his absence really borne out. And then he also can make better decisions on the short roll and everything else. So I have Lively third, and then have Miller fourth, and Amen Thompson fifth.
I think we got time for a sixth man too, and then we can leave some of our categories out there. Sixth man always difficult because it's much easier to parse between guys at the absolute top of the league. There's just, that's the nature of a normal distribution usually, is that, when you get towards the tails, there's more separation. There are more outliers. When you're trying to parse between all the players in the league who aren't good enough to start, it gets a lot more difficult. You've just got a bunch of guys in the middle of the league, and, that's much more eye of the beholder. But let's just throw some candidates out here and talk through this.
Let's do it. I mean, you have some of the players who derive a lot of their value on the defensive end, like the pair of Rockets with Tari Eason and Amen Thompson. You have the primary ball handler type of guards like Peyton Pritchard and Ty Jerome. Jerome, because of how the Cavs run the rotation, he's often playing with another good guard, but he has the ball in his hands a fair amount. Dalton Connect has not started enough, so he counts here. And then Malik Monk, I think, has been under discussed in this. He missed some time.
Well, he missed a bunch of time. Yeah,
he missed a bunch of time with ankle sprain, but he's done a good job. I will tell you, he will factor into my list. And then you've got other good players who don't start, like Daniel Gafford. I think makes that list. He's a clear-cut rotation player.
So Daniel Gafford, this is hilarious actually. Of their available games, both Lively and Gafford have started greater than 50% of their games.
That's so weird.
Right? Because you're like, Lively didn't make it. So he has started 9 of his 16 games. So obviously Gafford would have had to have not started 50%, but because
each of them missed a couple games.
Yeah, I was totally like, Lively doesn't qualify. I look at Gafford. Oh shit, he started 61% of his games too.
Yeah, when Lively didn't qualify, I auto put on Gafford for that reason. Oh, it's so funny.
I'll throw a few out there though. Scottie Pippen Jr. has started 45% of the games. So as is so often with this awards, when guys come in as a starter but don't actually qualify, that counts towards their performance. And I think he's been just a really high quality starting point guard. And not high quality; it's like top half of the league, but certainly a guy that you're not feeling like he's not good enough. Playmaking usage is very solid for a point guard. I think he's one of the absolute best defensive point guards. The on-off numbers somewhat reflect that. They're way worse offensively when he's on the floor, but that's because John Morant is the guy that he replaces. But he's been a starter level of point guard and is eligible for this, so he's right up there for me. I think some of his estimated plus minus and Raptor numbers are depressed by the fact that the on-off differential with him on offense is bad, but I don't really put that on him. That's just not the type of player that he is supposed to be. I get seeing signal there that doesn't really exist as far as labeling him a bad offensive player. Because he shoots it pretty well off the ball too. He's shooting 38% for 3, he passes, and he's a really good defender.
Speaking of shooting the ball, Buddy Hield, 12 threes per 36, making 44% of them. That is just incredibly valuable, even if you don't necessarily bring a billionaire thing to the table. But I don't think he's been terrible defensively either. He's been more neutral, and neutral with that kind of shooting volume is plenty good. Karis LeVert is making 47% of his threes, taking far fewer than Buddy Hield and a lot of other guys. But LeVert, 66% true shooting, and the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I don't think he's the most important part of this, but the Cleveland Cavaliers have a 127 offensive rating when LeVert is on the floor. So
it helps when he's hitting 47% of threes, and he's a quality defensive option.
Yeah, he's done a good job for them. So I think that's the primary. Is there anybody else?
Oh yeah, well Peyton Pritchard to me.
I mentioned
Pippen.
Him, yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry. Pippen is my number one. Just because again, I think he's just been a star level player. I generally default more towards guys who play a lot of minutes and or close games. I don't know if Pippen would close games next to John Morant. They've played those two guys together on occasion. We just haven't seen enough of Ja for that to evolve. Pritchard's my number 2. I mean, this volume is insane. 44% from 3, 11 per 36. He's a much better defensive player than Buddy Hield. He kind of violates my is he good enough to close standard, but that's because he plays in the Boston Celtics with Drew Holiday and Derek White, and he certainly closed fine against the Bulls. So I
have Pritchard number 1, and part of it is because he has a 29% total usage, which is one of the highest on this list, and the Celtics have a 124 offensive rating when he's on the floor. That's actually way better than when he's off. And so Pritchard has a pretty large role within the offense. They have a lot of great surrounding talent, but they've done really well in those minutes. And so for me, for Pritchard, that's a big part. Like he helps drive their offense. It's not, like he's Russell Westbrook or anything like that, but you know what? The Nuggets offense isn't as good with Russell Westbrook on the floor. So yeah. I think I have Pritchard 1.
Well, we surely have to discuss the candidacy of Jerome also.
Sure.
I mean, the shooting is insane. I mentioned it earlier, 52% from 3, 71% true shooting, by far the highest EPM of anybody of those. Defensive estimated plus minus is positive. I don't add a ton to that. Pritchard has by far the highest offensive EPM of anyone on this list. He's 4.1, Jerome's 3.6, and then nobody else is above 2.1, which is healed. So, I mean, Jerome, part of the problem, he's only averaging 19 minutes a game, and it's just, and 384 minutes overall. So it's just a little bit harder for me to get on board with that when he basically has been solely in a bench role, and not only in a bench role, but solely playing against backups that I didn't have him in my top group. If he keeps this up for more minutes and another month, and yeah, he has 71% true shooting on 22 usage. I'll probably put him in there.
Yeah.
Did we talk about Najee Marshall?
We did not. Najee Marshall, he's been a wonderful defensive player for a number of years now in New Orleans, not hitting his threes yet so far for Dallas, 29%, but he has still been effective. 63% true shooting, has been one of their guys who really does a good job running the floor in transition. And Najee Marshall, the Mavs are almost 6 points per 100 better with him on offense than when he's on the floor. And they have been worse defensively with Marshall on the floor, but there's some contextual reasons for that.
Yeah, and he's really also kind of saved them in this period when Luka has been out to give them a secondary score, having some of the best offensive games of his career.
Part of the reason why Eason and Thompson, the Houston perimeter guys, are really high on this is, of course, their defensive value. Those guys are both wonderful defenders, both averaging. So Eason's averaging 3.2 steals and 1.7 blocks per 36. Amen 1.8 and 1.3 respectively. And I think it's fair. I really value defense, but it is more perimeter defense, even if Amen I've talked about, he's been kind of an interesting rim protector because he's a hybrid defensively. And with Eason, it's impressive what he's been able to do. And the Rockets offense has been significantly better when he's on the floor versus off, but I don't think that's because of Tari Eason. That's just because of all of these other things. And then I kind of mentioned his name, and I think you were a little bit surprised by it. I have Malik Monk second because he has kind of this traditional case, which I respect. It's similar in a way to Bogdan Bogdanovic last year, where he's a very important part of their offense. He's at 33% total usage. That's one of the higher ones. It's lower than Scottie Pippen, but higher than almost everybody else, except for Ty Jerome, because Ty Jerome has this wild usage rate so far. And the Kings offense has been better, has been a 114, when he's been on the floor. So I think when he's on the floor, he's been an important part of their offense, and their offense has been pretty good. So I'm putting him there. If I really kind of was thinking about Ty Jerome and all this stuff, I probably should have him second instead. I'm just so skeptical. And I said this isn't predictive, but I think that Jerome's getting a lot of credit for things that other people are heavily involved in too.
Yeah, Monk, only the 13 games was a little bit low for me. I think I could see him at the top. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, we haven't talked about very much either. And, just some of the overall numbers for him are very, very interesting. 46% from downtown, 66% true shooting, not a big usage guy. And, I do think he's been pressed into service a little bit too much as a point guard. That's been the case throughout his year, but he certainly is a quality defensive combo guard as well, and shooting at that wall. Certainly, he hasn't been the problem. He's even been closing some games for Minnesota. I actually went with Amen Thompson as my number 3, Pippen 1, Pritchard 2, and then Amen Thompson number 3. The on-off numbers are really good for him. He's been very efficient. He hasn't really hurt their offense. And he's so core to their identity. Well, and he also has closed some too.
That's why I put Amen over Eason, but I have them 4 and 5 if we're counting it that way. Yeah. Pritchard 1, Malik Monk 2, Scottie Pippen Jr. 3.
All right, well, this was a lot of fun. Glad we got through 2 hours of this. We probably have another hour still to discuss some of the other categories in which we will delve. Our biggest surprise player, most disappointing player, same for team. Biggest surprise and most disappointing, and we'll do executive and not executive of the year, along with some news tomorrow. So join us there, and also a reminder to sign up for our newsletter. It is free, just like this version of the podcast. But of course, we encourage you to subscribe to Dunc'd On to get everything that Danny and I are doing, in addition to everything that John Hollinger and I are doing 5 days a week of Dan Feldman's Daily Dunks and all of the other stuff that we use to put this show on. You can look at it yourselves as well. So thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you all next time.